Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Interested Catholic podcast. Today, we have another special guest joining us. He is a primary school teacher and a parishioner of Corpus Christi. He is a former Capuchin friar, having been in initial formation with the Capuchin Franciscan order in South Africa for 4 years. He has also been involved in various ministries in the parish over the years. He is part of the church band in the parish and is a member of the team of lay faithful that gives parish retreats in the Archdiocese. Who else am I talking about but Jared Jamie? Hello, Jared, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Aidan, and of course Aidan in her absence, for hosting me. And I pray that God's hand may continue to be on you guys as you grow this podcast with God's love. So thank you for having me.
What made you want to get into the priesthood in the first place?
Well, the vocation started when I was going to the adoration chapel. My dad was assigned 6 hours on a Saturday afternoon to find adorers, man, because you needed at least one adorer per hour to spend time with Jesus. At that time, there was a hope to have a perpetual adoration chapel. So for 24 hours, there was at least one person present with Jesus. So my dad, it was the Divine Mercy Adoration Chapel. He was part of the Divine Mercy group. And we as a family had decided to take 1 hour on a Saturday. So between four of us, we did 1 hour each.
Oh, okay.
Between my parents and my brother and myself. So really the seeds were sown there. And through altar serving, there was a deep understanding of the Eucharist. And then wanting to serve God, as a priest. It changed slightly when I got to high school and I had my first girlfriend. I realized that it wasn't a cut and dry decision. It's something that I needed to reflect on more. Had I not had that relationship, however small it was, I think possibly I would have maybe gone into the seminary sooner. But I even remember receiving a letter from one of the Palatine priests who came to visit the parish. I was in grade 10 and I told him that I was thinking of priesthood, and he sent me 3 weeks later in the mail. It wasn't even email. Social media. It was the actual mailbox. A whole thick booklet on the Palatine order. And I thought, wow, okay, this is wonderful, but I'm only 16. and that's where it started. But I realized when I finished matric that I still needed to discern more. I didn't want to go into the priesthood, not being secure within myself that this would be the right thing to do. I was still very much healing from what had happened. I needed to grow as a young man. I needed to experience the world, work a bit, study. For me, I didn't think I would have been ready at that stage. But I still had it in the back of my mind. I said, it's still there, but let me study. I had a vocation also to do journalism and teaching.
Oh, okay.
So there were thoughts on journalism and teaching. And when I got into varsity college to do a BA degree, that's when I decided to pursue teaching, because I initially had applied for journalism in my matric year, and then I also thought more about teaching, and I felt more strongly about teaching because of my involvement with the youth, with young people at the parish. I thought that, I felt called to serve God in this way as well. And so I pursued a BA degree, and then with the plan to do a postgraduate certificate in education so I could qualify as a teacher. So in that time, there was also thoughts of priesthood, married life. There were days that I felt very strongly about going into the order. I could live in the desert for 20 years. And then there were days when I really wanted to possibly have a relationship. I'd had a couple of friends, but there was nothing serious. If there was something from my side, I either expressed it or I didn't express it, but the other person wouldn't feel the same way. So you're going through a lot of different feelings and emotions, but you are also living by the precepts of the church. I always lived by my Catholic faith. It wasn't a case of this is how I am at church on a Sunday, but when I'm at varsity or in the club, or not that I went a lot, or out in the world, that I behaved differently. My life was always under the shadow of the cross, and I'd always decided to live that way. I felt very comfortable in my own skin.
Okay.
Although it wasn't always popular, I had a group of friends from high school and even varsity where we had similar models of values. They weren't necessarily Catholic, but we had so many similarities, whether they were Hindu or Muslim, or they were an Orthodox Christian, Greek Orthodox. We had models and values. We sat at the table together. Our families were together. It was mommy and daddy. It just happened that way. I didn't decide one day, okay, I'm going to be friends with these guys because they have similar ways to me. I think out of all my friends, I only had one friend at that time at school whose parents were divorced.
Oh wow.
That
Okay.
was whose house I'd been to. So God really had a way. He really did something wonderful in my life there, and I felt I could always be open. I spoke about my vocation to the priesthood. And it was never a case of pushing on my beliefs to others or bashing a Bible and saying, you need to live this way, otherwise you're going to be condemned. No. For me, that's never been Christianity. There's a certain approach to evangelization, to considering one way of life to another. In order to bring the gospel, in order to bring Jesus to people, you must meet them where they are, because he calls us where we are. David wasn't perfect when God called him. Neither was Noah. Moses couldn't speak. So I took that to heart. What I was doing in the church, I felt that I could also, because I was one person, I wasn't two separate people with two separate identities.
I could be true to yourself.
I could be true to myself, and I could be that in the world. This is who I am. So I brought that with me. I encountered people from different backgrounds, different points of view, different religious beliefs, others who had no religious beliefs. But I saw something really amazing in them. In a sense, I could see God in them. So that all of that influenced my calling. And then as I finished my degree and I had to repeat a couple of modules, things didn't go, as planned. You got to plan and think, okay, I need to redo this module and redo that module. And I was in my mid-20s and I had an experience here at Corpus Christi. I was a Eucharistic minister at the time, maybe about a year. It was at the consecration. I saw myself, I had an experience, I had an experience where I saw myself consecrating the host as a priest on the altar wearing a brown habit. And it was so powerful, Aidan. It just consumed me. And I'd been struggling with these doubts in years gone by. I didn't pay attention to it. I brought it up at different prayer groups and, I'm thinking of priesthood. There's a bit of indecision here, There was basically the time had come now to say, look here, are you gonna try this now? Or are you gonna go the other way? It was almost like God was telling me, you almost now in your mid-20s, maybe the time now is to consider, have a look at what I'm asking you to do. And I felt the experience was so profound from a very spiritually emotional point of view that I felt that I could have left my studies immediately. No, that was my feeling, Aidan.
Oh wow!
I was halfway through my PGCE year, and I was like, that experience was so profound that I was like, okay, there's the books, there's everything. Baba, mommy, daddy, I'm going. It felt like that. It was that profound. I was crying that morning in the car, that I was shaking, and it was like nothing I'd felt before, because I felt such a profound sense of direction maybe that I had never experienced in my life. And I just had to bring it to the Lord in prayer, because I couldn't simply just act on it, but in my heart the decision had already been made. I need to try this out now. If there's ever a time to do it, God's hand is in here. This is not just me saying this. I remember the year before, certain priests in the parish had supported me. One or two hadn't understood. I remember one priest, and I won't share his name. He said, God's will, God's will, God's will. We knew you were going to go. I thought to myself, but Father, you've never been in love before. You've never...
We haven't shared it.
You haven't shared that before. It's not something that you can just go into. You need to pray about it. My society, my culture is very different from yours. These were things that I thought. And I didn't say anything out of respect, for Father. So all these things went through my mind. But after that experience, Aidan, it was I made up my mind in my heart and in my mind. I was just praying about it and asking God just for greater clarity. I told the young lady that I was interested in, because again, I even doubted that experience for a week, surprisingly. Went out with her. And then I realized, I can't pursue anything here with her, because there is this deeper calling, there is this deeper love. And I didn't tell her that I was considering becoming a priest. She only found out about it a couple of weeks later, because it was so intimate, man, this calling for me. Even my close friends didn't know about it. For months I kept this to myself, and only my parents knew, and maybe a handful of others. And the attraction, the brown habit, I believe that vision was there because I had a great liking to Francis of Assisi. I'd read a book by an American friar, which a friar refers to a mendicant religious brother or sister, because they don't stay in one place, they move around.
Okay.
I can live in different convents. If you're a nun or a monk, you stay in one convent or one monastery for the rest of your life, and you die there. But you can, of course, go on holiday, but you always return to that monastery unless, of course, you decide to leave. So Francis, there was a great affinity with Francis, and I'd read a short little biography by an American Franciscan called Francis, the Journey and the Dream. And it just resonated with me, man. There was something about Francis's life that resonated with me. And that's where his love for God, nature, feeding the poor, being with the lowly, that resonated with my life experience, and with how I had been brought up. And that's where I discerned, okay, I want to be Franciscan, but I want to help the people within my city. And the Capuchins were the Franciscans who were in the city.
Oh, wow. Okay, so there's Franciscan order, and then there's underneath that there's
the Capuchin Franciscan order, because it's one order, but they split into 3 different branches. So you have the OFM, the Order of Franciscans Minor, which we all are OFM, but the Capuchins just have a stricter rule, and our habit is darker, it's slightly different. So we have, it's all about poverty. The rule of St. Francis is the same, each order has a rule, but the constitution is slightly different. The Franciscans started off in the 12th century under Francis, but as they grew as an order, people started to interpret poverty differently. Francis was the first one to attempt to live the gospel poverty of Christ that Christ spoke about. No one in the history of the church had attempted to live radical poverty. So the interpretation of poverty is where the split in the order came.
Okay.
The conventuals who wear grey habit, and they wanted to be missionaries in the city. They said, look here, we can live in big buildings, we can live with the material things, but they are all gift. Okay. We're not attached to those. The Capuchins said, no, we need to return to the original rule, where we live simplistically. If we have a poverty check, if someone gives me a gift, I can receive that gift, that material gift from the person, but I need to ask the person, can I give it away if I'm not going to use it? So after a couple of months, you would have a poverty check and say, am I using this? Is it helpful to me? No. Okay, I can give it away. Wow. When I go and travel, and I'm going from, when I was in Athlone, from Athlone to St. Joseph's Home to another place, am I understanding what poverty is? Or am I just traveling willy-nilly because this is gift? The car that I have is gift. Francis said, whatever you have is gift. The only thing that we own is our sin. So it's that understanding of poverty, that detachment from the world, so that there's a complete focus on God. So the Capuchins had a different understanding of poverty, a more strict understanding. But I, of course, I only learned this as I joined the order. I wanted to be a Franciscan, and the Franciscan, and in Cape Town, in my own city, because I felt that's where it was needed. I felt I couldn't minister outside, I needed to minister inside, so that I could also, in a way, be God's instrument to find vocations.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's why I pursued the Capuchins. I met with one of the priests in Athlone. He wasn't the provincial superior, but usually it's a longer process. Like it's a come and see, and there's a whole lot of interviews, but they hadn't had vocations in 9 years. Wow, I was maybe the first young man who'd been interested. The last Father Anstey, who stays in Welcome Estate, he was the last brother to be entered into the order, basically, and he was being ordained within a couple of months. So there'd been a period of 9-10 years where they hadn't had anyone in formation. So Father Albert, he accepted me. He said, look here, you do need to go for a psychological evaluation, as is prescribed for all young men and women. But I was so emotional about it. I just broke down, I said, look, I need to serve God, It was some way or another. Exactly, some way or another. It wasn't the most professional meeting, when I broke down and I cried in front of him. But he said, no, we accept you, we'll be in contact. And, I couldn't believe, I knew there was stuff that I needed to do. I sent in my CV, I knew I needed to finish my teaching course. But it was kind of a whirlwind journey, because I just kept this, to myself. And in the later months of October, November, I started maybe telling close friends, family. And in December, I then started going for my psychological evaluation. I thought, oh my word, 6 hours, how am I going to do this? 3 2-hour sessions.
6 hours for a psychological evaluation?
Yeah, to enter into the order.
Wow. Okay.
So it was good. And I said, Lord, your hand is here. And I was just very open and honest with the psychologist, and the results of the evaluation were positive. He said, Jared he can enter the religious life. He is stable mentally, emotionally. I thought, okay, thank the Lord. I was now worried because depending on your results, they can either accept you or not. They will either tell you, look here, maybe you need to work on things for a year, or maybe it's not for you. And it just depends on the order or the religious congregation. So it was at the end of January 2015 that I started. And that's where everything just took off.
2015.
January 2015. So yeah, and from there really my faith just grew. To start it off, the seed was planted from seeing priests, seeing religious. It always fascinated me as a young boy, seeing sisters, seeing nuns, seeing priests, and they were different from everyone else. But in a good way. And my interactions with them were always positive. I always saw something in them. I remember when I started off as an altar server here at Corpus Christi, and we had an altar service day. And that time it was still at St. Joseph's in Rondebosch. Today they have the youth ministry day, and it includes the altar service in Lansdowne.
Oh, okay.
They've had that now for the past couple of years. I don't know if they still do it, but it changed. The venue changed. And I remember asking the late Archbishop, God rest his soul. I felt very free. I said, Your Grace, did you ever have a girlfriend? And his response was so human. He chuckled a bit, he laughed, and he said no, but he had a couple of friends that he used to play tennis with. And that response, it had a profound impact on me, because here's the shepherd, this man of God who's leading the archdiocese. Here's his humanity. And that told me that, wow, this way of life is sacred, but it's also human. And
I think a lot of people forget that, like, they put priests and deacons and sisters, religious people, above the fact that they're still human.
And that was so profound for me, because every priest that came to Corpus Christi, every nun or sister that I encountered, when I spoke to them, I saw their humanity, and I just saw them as everyone else. I didn't have this thing of, fathers here, or sisters here, I need to be on my best behavior. It was a case of seeing their humanity. And that had a profound impact on me, because I felt, okay, I don't know much about the life that they live. I was still very young, but that attracted me to them. And I always admired the life that they lived. And through being an altar server, interacting with the various priests, getting involved with the youth group, spending time with certain priests, that also made me think more and more about the vocation. So it really was blessed in that sense. And I can't thank God enough. I mean, even visiting the nuns, the Carmelite nuns in the retreat to make the hosts for the archdiocese, that was also a wonderful experience. It's not something that is here in Cape Town that is very visible. We don't have a lot of monasteries or convents because we are still a missionary church. But to see priests, to see nuns, to see them in their habit, to see them in their collar, brought a great joy to me. And I just enjoyed being around them, asking them normal questions. what people would term normal questions. And I didn't feel scared to do it. I was always very respectful, but I felt that I could just be myself around them.
Yeah, no one would expect you asking the Archbishop
exactly
a question like, did you have a girlfriend?
Truly. And I was 11 at the time. I was in grade 5.
That's like it's not like a high level question. No. You're asking this at 11.
Exactly. I thought reflecting on it, and I was like, oh my word. Did I really ask the Archbishop that? But at the time, it came from a purely innocent point of view, from pure innocence. Those were my first impressions. They were people that were different, but I saw that humanity, and that really attracted me to them, to find out what does their way of life consist of. And as I got older, I went to vocation days, and it's just been such a beautiful journey. When I joined the Capuchins then at the end of January of 2015, the sense of understanding priests and nuns and brothers, I got to understand the deeper sense of what the life entailed. There's a lot of sacrifice in it, and there's also periods of consolation and periods of dryness. Consolation means there's great joy, great euphoria, and great happiness in prayer life. And there are times of dryness where you might feel, that God is there, but because of maybe the internal struggles that you are dealing with in discerning this call to serve God as a priest or as a nun or as a religious brother, that you're working on things. It's all a case of purification. But what gave me such consolation, such contentment was my religious superiors leaders and my teachers at the seminary always said to us, you know, Jared, or to the brothers, if you don't fall in love in your period of formation, then you're not human. If everything was smooth, we would be concerned that you'd be ordained and there weren't any obstacles. The fact that these things are coming to you, coming to light in your prayer, coming to light in your personal life, is God telling you to look at certain things. He's bringing up maybe things in your past that maybe you didn't acknowledge. And that was there for me. Certain wounds that I had to deal with, that I had to be healed. Certain instances in the past that I had to look at. It was also a time of profound conversion for me. My faith grew stronger. I came to just love and see God more because I was spending more time with Him. It was so different from what I was used to. But it was just so profound.
Okay.
And it was amazing. I began to appreciate and see more the humanity of the order. I had romanticized religious life. You know, you'd see it in the movies or in clips and, okay, it's like this. We're all going to be like St. Francis. We're going to be singing in the fields. And then you realize, okay, it's not always that way. There's a very human element here where at times their humanity is like the humanity of laity. You know, they also have their ups and downs. They're also not going to be, their light is not going to be burning bright all the time. The halo is not going to be shining. It's going to get dusty. But know that God has a plan for them. And that led to a conversion in my own heart because I came to accept their humanity. I put them at times on a pedestal. Although I'd accepted their humanity, they to me, you know, they needed to behave in a certain way. It humbled me. God humbled me in that way and said, Jared, this is what I'm calling people to live like. See, this is the humanity that I'm talking about. Appreciate them. Love them as they are. And that was it had a profound effect on me because at that time, I was also struggling in formation. There were periods, like I said, of great closeness with God and periods of dryness. But it was a time of purification as well.
Okay.
And God just did so many things for me in my life that I had to look at. Thought to myself, okay, I'd been single for so long, this will be fine. This will be absolutely fine. And you realize it's not, you know, that the Lord is saying, look here, this is what you need to do. I remember after my first period of formation, that first year and a half I was in Athlone from January 2015 to August of 2016.
Okay.
That period was called postulancy. So it's almost like a come and see. So I was living with the brothers, living like a brother, but I still had on civilian clothing. I said the prayers, but I made no vows, no commitments to the order. It was a time of study, of introduction to the order, Franciscan study, and I was studying at the seminary as well in Athlone. It's in Lawrence Road. So that's where, it's the orientation seminary. So before a diocesan priest, a priest who belongs to the archdiocese, before he goes to John Vianney or to Sadara in KwaZulu-Natal to study his philosophy and theology, they go to the orientation seminary for 1 year. And then they would go to the national seminary. So if you are a religious priest, you belong to a religious congregation or order. So you first discern whether you want to be a Franciscan, a Dominican, a Carmelite. Then you discern becoming a priest, you know?
Okay.
So there's diocesan priests and then there are religious priests. So the religious priests belong to a congregation or an order. The diocesan priests belong to the diocese. They serve the bishop. But the religious priest serves his superior. So he can move to any part of the world depending on the needs of the order or the congregation. But of course, if he is in the archdiocese, his loyalty is also to the superior and he does give his loyalty to the bishop.
Okay.
But he can move out of the diocese. So those are the two distinct differences in priesthood. Diocesan priests make promises, religious priests make vows. Diocesan priests will make a promise of celibacy and a promise of obedience. Poverty is voluntary. Diocesan priests can still have a bank account.
Yeah.
Religious make vows, so they have a vow of poverty. So they basically, when they take their permanent vows, after maybe 7 or 8 years, they draw up a will and everything that they own they would give away. And they of course make a vow of chastity, which is similar to celibacy. It's just that a commitment just to love God, to be chaste. And also they would make a vow of obedience. It's essentially the same but also slightly different.
Okay.
If the church was to change its teaching on marriage, for example, and permit priests to get married, it would only affect diocesan priests.
Oh, really?
Yes, because diocesan priests don't have to live in community. They can live alone. They don't take a vow. They don't take a vow of poverty. It would only affect diocesan priests, but religious priests, those who live as monks, friars, brothers, it wouldn't affect them because they've made a promise to God to live in community. They don't live alone. So the community life is like a family for them. Whereas the diocesan priest, they live alone. But if the church was to make that change, it would only affect diocesan priests.
Okay, wow. And you were talking about the clothing that the monks and the friars would wear. Is there any sort of seniority where the colors would change at all as you move up through the order?
So basically, there wouldn't be any differences in color. The habit in the Capuchin order would remain the same. So when I was in formation, my second part when I got to Ireland to do my novitiate, because I was the only novice in South Africa from the order, and they thought of sending me to Tanzania, to Zambia, and possibly to Ireland. And they decided to send me to Ireland because they had 3 novices there, and they wanted a round number of 4. So I said, Lord, I'll go.
Requirements.
Exactly. Because the Irish province, they brought the Capuchin order to South Africa. So Ireland is our mother province here in South Africa for the Capuchin Franciscans. So when it comes to a habit, the friars all wear brown habit. So whether you are a priest or a lay brother is a man who's not a priest, but he can have an occupation like a teacher, a physiotherapist, any occupation, and the income that he earns, he will then give it to the order. And he does maybe things around the friary. A friary is another word for a monastery or the church. So the habit would be the same. In some other provinces or countries, when a brother is a novice, so he's preparing to take simple vows. So vows that he will renew every year or every 2 years before his perpetual vows. His habit would consist of a cord, and there wouldn't be any knots in the cord for that 1 year because he hasn't made vows yet. And the capuche, which is the hood, that would be in 2 parts. So you'd have the normal brown habit but without the hood. So certain novice brothers in certain countries, they would have a hood that they would put over their habit. But once you make vows, the hood becomes part of the habit. And once you make vows, there are 3 knots that are tied in your cord that represent your 3 vows: poverty, chastity, and obedience. So when I was a novice brother, you knew we were novice brothers because we never had knots in our cords. We had the habit, so you couldn't distinguish whether we were priests or lay brothers, but you knew that we were novice brothers from the knots, because we hadn't made vows yet. So there really is, it's slight differences. As for the other religious congregations, when it comes to religious sisters as well, they might have a certain veil that they would wear to say, okay, I'm in initial formation, I'm in the progress of taking solemn vows, but I haven't taken solemn vows yet. It just depends on the order and the congregation. But usually once everyone is professed, you all wear the same habit, even if you are the superior or the youngest brother or monk or nun in the order or congregation, you wear the same habit. If a religious brother becomes a bishop, he can then wear clerical clothing. And his vow of poverty, then it has to move to the side because he has to then stay in the bishop's residence. But he's still part of the order, because that's when you are called to be a bishop. That calling comes, of course, from the Holy See, from the Pope, from the Vatican. So if there's a need, the brother can then accept that position from the Holy Father. But other than that, the habit would remain the same, whether they are the most senior rank or they are a junior in the order or congregation.
No, that's cool. It's not like you have any seniority. I mean, you can see it.
Yes.
But it's not like apparent. Okay. And when it comes to just general religious life, you were talking about the fact that you weren't obsessing over like, how should I act with priests? That's very different to my experiences. When I was growing up in catechism or confirmation, there was always this feeling of, okay, this structure in which you should behave. So that's very different experience compared to you. If you looked back on your experience, would there be anything that you more or less would think of differently or would change in your actions, in the way that you approached?
I mean, I think it's a very valid and very good question, Aidan. I think I would maybe have did a little more research, I think, on the way of life that I was going to be partaking in, a little bit more reflection. It kind of was a whirlwind journey, and usually when it comes to formation, when a young man or young woman enters a religious congregation or religious order, there is usually more preparation involved. You usually get invited for a weekend. The brothers will say, look, you come and spend the weekend with us. There'll be a couple of talks, a couple of presentations. And usually there are 3 or 4 weekends in a year where you go and do that. You still live your normal life, either studying or working, but you will come for the weekend. So I think at the time the order in Cape Town didn't have maybe the manpower to do that. They were still training brothers to help with formation, but there was also very few in the congregation because of the vocation crisis. So I do think that I would have maybe done a little bit more research, a bit more reflection. I thought I was quite mature when I entered, and I realized that there was a lot of maturity that still needed to develop within myself. But I think I would do that differently, and possibly when it comes to formation, I would have maybe, for my philosophy years, I would have maybe come back to South Africa. I spent almost 2 years in Ireland, and in that first, it took a lot out of me, in a sense that I'd first had to deal with being away from home. Okay. And then I had to deal with the concept of just serving God as a priest. And one thing I never really understood before I joined was you have to grieve about not having a wife, about not having children. That word grief was so profound because I started noticing mothers pushing babies in prams. I'd never noticed that before when I was in the world, so to say. But my spiritual director told me, Jared, the Lord is saying to you, although you don't have this, you might never have it, you must grieve about this. And I think what I would have done differently is maybe thought more about what I was giving up. Okay. I thought because of that my experiences with relationships were limited, that it would be easier for me to deal with that side of myself. I found it very hard because I come from a family where we are very social, and often religious life, brothers have different personalities, sisters have different personalities. There's silence, and silence is quite important in certain aspects of religious life, and even around the dinner table. And it was very difficult for me to adjust to that. I'm someone who likes to go deep in a conversation.
Yeah, you want to know how people are, yes, what they're doing.
Exactly, and I struggled profoundly with that. And there were times where no man, everything is just here on a surface level, but I felt like I needed more. I had to then discern, as I was in the order, can I do this for the rest of my life? Because as a brother, as a sister, you don't live with the same people. You move every 3 or 4 years. The quote from the gospel, the Son of Man has no place to lay down his head. It's very true, because you are uprooted. And that also had a profound effect on me. I never thought it would. You're going to be here for 3 years. You get used to a group of people, you make friends, and now God calls you to move somewhere else. On reflection, I believe maybe I should have thought about that more, reflected about that more, given the family home that I'd come from. But I've got no regrets on that. I just think maybe I could have done a bit more research, especially on what religious life entailed. Living with brothers, accepting their humanity. Like I told you earlier, there was this romanticism that I had, and it wasn't that at all. So I would have done that differently, and I would have maybe done my philosophy in South Africa because I was away from home for too long. And I was struggling with the life. And when I'd gotten to Zambia, I just felt that God is there, but I had to make the difficult decision to then say to my superior, and to say to the Lord, look here, I don't feel that maybe this is for me. I need to step away for a bit because I'm struggling to live the life. I had taken a lot of mental and emotional strain. So that was difficult. And I think had I maybe been in my own country, it would have been at that stage of philosophy, it maybe would have been easier for me to deal with the strains and the struggles that I had. But I was also now looking at the possibility of being away from home for another 3 years. And I'd been out of my country for 2.5 years. And I'd
calling to come home again.
There was, that familiarity. There was this discerning that, and now you were dealing also with different cultures. But there was really a challenge there to live the life. I felt there was a deep struggle where I thought, you know what, Lord, I need to step away and reflect again, because I need to be true to you, and I need to be true to myself. I need to be true to Holy Mother Church. I need to be true to the order, because the struggle that I have is affecting me. It's affected me in a very deep emotional and mental way. Nothing, not that there was anything bad, but I felt that I just needed to step away. I was struggling and I needed to do the right thing. Very difficult, one of the most difficult decisions I made, but I thank God that He helped me through it. And I felt lighter for it. It was an honor and a privilege being a Capuchin. And I thank God for that experience. I don't regret that experience. I would do it in a heartbeat if God called me again. I learned so much about myself. And I wouldn't be half the man I am if it wasn't for that experience, truly. I thought I knew my faith. I thought I knew myself. When you experience that life, even if it's just for a month or a year, God transforms your heart and He shows you things that maybe you would have never seen before. Wounds, things that you thought, okay, in your past you had dealt with. And yet He says, no, come back to this, come back to that. Look at yourself, look at me, this is what you need to do. And you need to be honest with yourself. There's this focus on being completely honest with yourself. That held me at my core because I always wanted to be authentic. It's always about being authentic, not putting on a brave face and smiling. But if I'm struggling, I needed to deal with that. And when I told the brothers, told them at supper time, I wasn't allowed to tell them that I was leaving. I had to keep it to myself for 2 weeks.
Why couldn't you tell them?
Because the superiors didn't want me to maybe disturb the others or to worry them. Although it's a personal decision, they felt that it would maybe upset the rhythm in the student house.
But why would that have been a thing? Because you're saying it's a personal thing for you to deal with.
Yes.
So why would it then affect a group of people? If it's meant to be an individual experience?
And that's a good question. It's something that I asked my superiors as well, but they felt that although it is an individual thing, that I needed to put that aside for the betterment of the order. And under the vow of obedience, although it was temporary vows, I followed that. Another thing I also didn't want to do was have younger brothers or brothers in philosophy come and ask me, why am I leaving? And get all those questions. I was staying on a campus with over 200 brothers.
Oh, okay.
So there were 70 Capuchins, there were 80 or 90 conventuals, 100 OFMs from all parts of Africa, Ghana, Cameroon, Zambia, Mauritius, Angola, Mozambique. So we represented the entire continent. And I'd grown fond of a lot of them. But I realized also at that stage, maybe that is why the superiors didn't want me. They wanted me to tell them when my departure was imminent. Not in a bad way, when I was
a day before
when I was about to leave, essentially, which is not the best thing.
It's really not.
It's not the best thing. It's difficult, but I don't look at that and blame them for it. But I just feel that they could have handled it maybe in a different way, because I basically told the brothers 2 days before I left at supper.
Oh goodness.
So we were sitting at the supper table, all 70 of us, and the superior said, Brother Jared, you can now make that announcement.
2 days before? No.
And the decision had been made in my mind and in my heart. I'd spoken to my superiors 2 weeks before that. So you can imagine how difficult it is, you keeping up appearances.
Yes.
So it was immensely difficult, I must admit. It was immensely difficult just to keep that to myself and just to be calm.
Because surely you made connections with them.
Yes.
So surely there must have been like this, not this loyalty, but this like need to tell them as soon as possible.
Yes. There were times I think for a week or so, the last week I stopped going to lectures because I wasn't going to be writing the assessments for that December, and they thought I was studying, and I had to, I just had to go on with it because I was reflecting, being positive, just listening to my gospel, and just thinking about how am I going to now move forward from this, because it's quite a thing. It's a life that I thought I would do for the rest of my life, something I would do for the rest of my life. So it was challenging. And I think in future, and I hope that with information now, that they would maybe do things differently, because it's not healthy. There was a great strain. But when I told them, I was relieved. But in the process of those 2 days, I think I had visits from more than 100 student brothers asking me, Brother, why are you leaving? And you just having the patience to say, I just feel this life is not for me, and not being patient with everyone. God has given me the great virtue of patience. So I'd often get a knock on my door, brothers wishing me well, asking me why. I said, I'm simply being honest with myself. And I can only thank God for that. And I think it had a good effect on some of the brothers in Zambia, because it helped them to also ask themselves that honest question: is this life for me? And that there's nothing wrong if God calls me to somewhere different. It's the fact that I've thought about this and I'm not letting God down. That was something I struggled with immensely, Aidan. I thought, when I first came back, it was very difficult coming to Mass, seeing Father on the altar for at least 2-3 weeks. It was very difficult, because if you're in a relationship and you break up with someone, you don't go and see them again. You don't go have coffee on the last Sunday of the month like you used to. You can move away from that and you can have time to heal. But how do you, in a sense, break up with God, with the faith? You know, and a lot of guys have left the church when they have left the priesthood or studying for priesthood, and that was never my case. I never wanted to do that. Although my relationship with God was very dry, and only later I could admit that I was a bit upset at Him, maybe allowing me to go through this. I knew that I needed Him, and there were no tears when I left. But everything came full circle that Easter of 2019, that Holy Thursday, the Feast of the Lord's Supper, with the washing of the feet, where I just let everything out, because this was a life that I thought was for me, and I came to recognize that I just needed to just let everything out. I'd been putting on a brave face, and I then went back to spiritual direction, because I thought, no, I can deal with this, I'll be fine. Wasn't fine at all. Struggled with a lot of things. I wanted to withdraw myself completely from the world and just be in my own little box, and I couldn't do that. I needed to find a way to move forward, and God helped me to. I knew when I left that I couldn't go into a serious full-time job, because my mental and emotional state wasn't there. I wasn't strong enough to do that. So I started, through a friend of mine, I did some PA work for the Greek Orthodox Archbishop of Cape Town for 2 months, working as his PA, nothing heavy. And then I started tutoring. Because being a teacher, I thought I need to get back. I want to do this. I want to give this. Maybe God is calling me to being a teacher again, after having me have this experience as a brother. So I started tutoring with Cultivating Excellence, and then with God's grace and His love, His hand would have it that I would start at St. Teresa's Primary. Those first 2 years were incredibly hard for me, and then when COVID hit, it was a lot to take.
How did you cope with that?
Yeah, it was difficult, because I had that 8 months. I was dealing with leaving, trying to heal and to, just to find peace with my decision. And then, things in the family happen. And so there are another wave of emotions that happen as well. And now COVID hits. So it was a lot to process, but God really, He gave me the strength, and He gave me just such a wonderful family and church dynamic to process and to deal with it. The support of my spiritual director as well. He's now in Johannesburg. He's a Jesuit priest. It really helped me. And also, in that time, we were praying the rosary as a family. And really, the Blessed Mother's intercession also helped me there. So I was very thankful, to God for that period. It was extremely difficult, but I needed it. And I ended up, I would really say, at the beginning of last year, finding that peace and that closure to go back to the Capuchin brothers and visit them and say, how are you? I'm comfortable enough now to be with you guys again, to talk to you, to be in your presence, because when I had left, I needed to heal, man. I couldn't go to the younger brothers and I couldn't be with any of them, because I didn't want to project anything negative onto them. This is their journey, it's sacred. There were younger brothers below me, but I needed to be the best version of myself and not be this mopey person who was sad that his vocation didn't work out. I never ever wanted to do that. I never wanted to project that onto others, because it is a beautiful life. Whether it's for you or not, it's still beautiful, because God's hand is in it. If you are acting on His motives and His hand is guiding your decision, it is a beautiful way. So it was challenging, but God gave me the strength with regards to my family, the church community, friends, and even my spiritual director to move forward.
No, that's quite a journey, eh?
Incredible, truly. Yeah.
And if you were to give any advice to those trying to go through discernment, what would you give them? What advice would you impart to them?
Well, I think the first thing is to ask yourself, am I able to live the way of a priest, a nun, or a religious brother or sister? And if there's a strong calling to maybe yes, or even if there's an uncertainty, be open to speaking to priests, nuns, religious brothers and sisters, and then to make inquiries about it. Vocations and being interested in religious life and discerning priesthood, it's not always easily accessible. But I believe that talking to your local priest, talking if you can to sisters who are maybe attached to your parish, it'll be a very good starting point. And just being open to what God is asking of you. Don't put this pressure on yourself and think, oh no, I can't serve God in this way. There's too many things wrong with me. Don't think like that. Be open. And just know that God calls people as they are, because it's in the Bible. It's in the many stories of the men and women who are out there. The saints never started off perfectly. Francis wasn't this incredible man of God that he started off being. He was a man who was struggling with his life, who was struggling with meaning, who thought that material wealth and glory would give him peace. It was Christ that gave him peace in the end. And the poverty that he had, he ended up embracing it and loving it. So God calls you as you are. And your vocation is just not limited to being a priest or a brother or a sister or a nun. It's in hosting a podcast. It's in being a lawyer. It's in fighting for social justice. It's maybe being a good and honest politician. It's in feeding the poor. It's in belonging to the Sacred Heart, the Legion of Mary, being involved in Life Team, being involved in Alpha. All these groups, it's vocation. It's not by accident. God's hand is there. It's not just random. You have a desire and a purpose. But when that desire and purpose, and this is what we need to pray about, we have hopes and dreams, but we need to say, Lord, let my hopes and dreams be in line with your will. And that would make the path clearer. So that's the advice I would give young people. I'd give to anyone. And also to maybe have a spiritual director. Ask maybe your priest or a religious sister that maybe you close to or you trust, if you could speak to them about your spiritual life and how you can grow in the spiritual life, and also take it from there.